Hail, Dicelings, and ready your excuses, because today we're going to blow them out of the water. Alright everybody, welcome back to Drop Dice. I am Chris, and I'm going to talk to you today about No Excuses, Play the Game, Blades in the Dark. So this is a series that I used to do, and I haven't done in a while just because I haven't had any other games that I wanted to add to the playlist, but I've received a couple questions about two of the games in particular that I've been doing more recently, Blades in the Dark and Burning Wheel. I'll do Burning Wheel later on, but today we're going to talk about, obviously, Blades in the Dark. If you've been on my channel, you know I have hundreds of hours of content dedicated to how to play the game, how the mechanics work, how each playbook works, what kind of modes of play that you can expect. So if you're interested in more, definitely check out the playlist that I will link at the bottom about what is Blades in the Dark. But this is a really short version. I'm going to try and keep it about 10 minutes to be on the point and kind of explain some points to you about why you should maybe consider it. This was brought on because Tyler has sent me a message and he says, what does the game do well? Does it work for one-shots as well as campaigns? Any cool mechanics? What is the gameplay like in character progression? Anything that it does poorly? I'm basically asking because I'm looking for reasons if I should buy it over something like Burning Wheel or City of Mist. Now, I'm not going to say that you should buy it over one or the other. That's a personal choice, but I'm going to give you reasons why you should maybe consider buying it. Number one reason is the SRD is free. So if you don't necessarily care about having all of the setting information, you can go to the SRD, look up the rules, and there's enough on there that you could play a basic game of Blades of the Dark to see if you like the mechanics. So first off, play it for free. That's kind of my major tip. If you do decide to buy it, just real quick, I want to touch on production value. This is a digest version of the book. It is incredibly well bound, and it is much, much, much better than like my Paizo books, which are very durable, but they're fraying on the edges. And I have like first print books of a lot of those. Way better than the WotC books that I have, because all of my WotC books are first print. They fell apart because of the printer that WotC decided to use. This one has junked around in my car, moved between states. I've carried it to different like shows and events, and I read between my in between my shifts and things like that. So this book has been around and moved around a lot. So real excited to say the production value is great. With that said, let's kind of talk about what the game basically is. Your character is made up of a amount of skills, which are called actions inside the game. Each action has a number of dots next to it. If you have no dots, you roll 2 dice and take the lowest. If you have 1 dot or higher, you roll that many number of dice and you take the highest. You can get advantage and you can get aid, which will allow you to gain an extra die inside there. So the cool thing is there is a narrative positioning system. Now that we understand how the pool is made, let's talk about what the GM does to create the situation for you. I'm going to use an example here to kind of personify what this would mean in game. The first narrative positioning that you can get is controlled. Controlled means that you have the upper hand, you're in charge of the situation, you don't have much to risk. Think about it like gambling. That's the easy way to think about your positioning. In a controlled situation, say that you're breaking into a building. The cops don't know that you're trying to do it, and there are no enemies anywhere nearby that would detect that you're coming in through this entrance. So you have a controlled situation, you roll your 2 dice to lurk to get past that lock, and you do. Yay. Good times. Let's say on the flip side, the cops are aware that someone will be breaking into this building, but they're not onto you yet. That's a risky situation because there are patrolmen. They may come around while you're trying to unlock the door. So you roll your dice, and let's say this time instead you fail. What I may do as the GM, depending on how bad your failure is you may get noticed by the cops and have to engage with them, whether it is to convince them that you're doing something that you're supposed to be doing and hiding the fact that you're here trying to break into the building, or you can fight them, or anything really that you choose to do as a player. Let's say instead of doing a very hard fail like that, I do a softer fail. You hear the cops say, "Oh, I heard a noise," and they come running around the corner. Well, instead of me telling your character that there is no other option, they could again try to repick the lock, but now it's going to be a desperate situation, or they can choose to run away. For the purposes of my explanation, let's assume that they decide to go back and pick the lock. The cops are coming. They're jiggling their lockpick in there. They roll their dice. And now basically the results are going to be the cops are in your face. They're going to have an advantage. They're going to catch you with your lockpick in there, and they're going to get the first attack on you most likely if you fail. But if you succeed, you're going to sneak in, slam the door shut, and it's going to be a nail-biting adventure. I really like that mechanic. That's one of the things that I think it does really cool. Another thing that I think it does really cool is how the adventures work. So you start by getting a gig or mission, and you basically go out and do your job. When you do the job, you are breaking into a bank, fighting one of your enemies, stealing turf, things like that. Anything that is in-game that could be considered like a mission for a group of thieves, that's what's open and fair game for you. Depending on your crew, certain missions are better suited to you and you're more likely to do. For example, if you're scavengers, or excuse me, not scavengers, if you are smugglers, there we go, that's the word I was looking for, a lot of the times you're going to be smuggling. So when you pick a crew, you're basically telling the GM, these are the kinds of missions that I would like to see the most. Is I'd like to smuggle things, which means that I want to do more transport missions. I want to sneak across borders. My social missions are not necessarily as important unless it's social missions with like dock authorities and things like that. So basically that's how you decide what kind of missions you go on. At the end of the mission, you will roll to determine your loot, and then you roll entanglements. Entanglements is one of the cool things that I really like as a GM. Basically, it's a chart that, depending on where you're at with your wanted level and your heat, you roll against it, and that determines what happens to the gang inside the interim between missions. So let's say that my players are running around and they get back, they get their loot, they're real excited, they start healing their wounds. I roll on the entanglement chart. It's up to me as the GM whether I want to tell them the result of the entanglement or I can just let them find out narratively in play. So if I get something like one of their allies gets snatched up, I have the cops grab up one of his allies and question him, and they discover it in-game. If they want their friend out of jail and they want to clear their friend's name, they have to work to that inside the game. So after about 3 sessions, the campaign takes a life of its own. They have enemies and allies, and then they have these entanglements, which just compound each session and get worse and worse. Basically, it's to emulate kind of the fact that if you are going to live the life of a mob bandit type person inside this fantasy setting, that it's going to get harder the longer that you live that life, that you're going to make enemies and that you're going to have to make friends. I really like that. That's one of the cooler mechanics that it does do. Does it work well for one-shots as well as campaigns? I will say that it works better for campaigns, and if you do one-shots, I would suggest that you actually do a mini-series. At least when you first try it out, do like 3 games so that you can see all the different modes of play, downtime, doing a job, entanglements, that sort of thing. I would do at least 3 sessions because you should be able to get 1 mission per session. And I found that kind of the sweet spot for Blades in the Dark is usually 3 players. 3 players is a really good dynamic. 4 players is fairly good, but once you start getting into more, because it's a more social interactive game, you're going to end up cutting everyone's RP time short. So 3-4 players is a pretty good place to be. For one-shots, here's a couple pieces of advice for you. Girl by Moonlight's writer Andrew said that you should basically treat this as season 2. We're going to make our characters, and during season 1, they went through that awkward phase where they kind of didn't get along, and then they came together to fight the bad guy, and then at the end, they broke apart for whatever reason, and this is season 2. They're coming back together. We know things about the characters. This will allow us to narratively say that, like, my character has a sister that we found out during season 1 went missing. And season 2, I'd like the game to be about finding his sister. Which is kind of cool to do it that way. It allows you to establish some things that the characters would know and feel natural, to where it's just kind of like pulling an episodic adventure out and running it as a one-shot. Another thing that you can do is let the players fill in the blanks. This is a really good technique for any game system to run a one-shot, which is you basically give them the premise of the adventure and say, hey, you're going to rob a bank, but you guys are going to fill in the details as to why you're having a bad day. Episode 3, I think it was, for Blades in the Dark on this channel. I did that with the group, and it was a fantastic game. Probably one of my favorites that I did in Blades in the Dark. It was completely out of sync with the rest of the episodes that we had done up to that point. But at the end of the game, because of how I was maneuvering the story, it felt like it was an adventure that happened sometime after our first 3 episodes, but still very important to our overall story. So it does work as a one-shot game, but you have to familiarize yourself with the rules and play some of those good one-shot GM tricks. The next thing is, what is character progression like? Basically, your character answers some questions at the end of the game that is about like discovery, more or less. Let me grab the book here, and I will pull up one of the characters. All right, so the Lurk. The Lurk is basically your traditional rogue. They do roguely activities, and they have a focus on finesse and prowl. And my dogs are going to be assholes during this video, so I apologize about that. So finesse and prowl is mainly what they do. And let me find their questions here. Okay, so when you play a slide, you earn XP when you address a challenge with deception or influence. Whereas if I had played a spider, which is more of a social character, when you play a spider, you gain experience by addressing a challenge with calculation or conspiracy. So one of the things that you can get experience for is playing your character the way that the class is designed. So that's a pretty easy one to get. There's other questions inside the game that are generic to everyone. Let me see if I can find those real quick. You know what? I know a faster way. I will pull up the play documents. Here we go. So the other 3 questions are universal to every character sheet. So I'll just pull up one of them real quick here. Here's the Cutter. So the Cutter is kind of more of your brawler, fightery type rogue. He's the muscle, more or less. So he gets, every time you roll a desperate action, you mark experience for that attribute. That's something that happens every single time throughout play. At the end of the session, if you address a challenge with violence or coercion, you get experience as a Cutter. That's your special one. You expressed your beliefs, drives, heritage, and background. These are kind of your fluffy bits of your character. You get a point for that. That's RP stuff. You struggled with issues from your vice or traumas during the session. Again, kind of a fluffier narrative thing. You can get 1 or 2 points depending on how much you played to these things during the game. So playing a character that is complicated and has flaws will advance faster. Once you fill up that chart, you can choose to gain a point towards one of your stats, making your dice pools higher, or you can choose to gain a special ability. And the special abilities modify how you roll things or change what you do narratively, and they're really cool. You feel powerful inside the setting, but not like ridiculous level 20 powerful. It's more like level 10 powerful once you start getting a lot of abilities. Characters feel important to the setting. And the really cool thing is your enemies have a lot of those same abilities. One of my favorite ones, which Jeff took inside our game, which was Ghost Contract that the spider can use. Basically, it is a way to bind somebody to their word. If they break their word to you, they're going to get inflicted harm that will almost kill them. And the other person knows that the oath was broken. I thought that was a really cool narrative thing to add to the game. That is why you might want to consider Blades in the Dark inside your future endeavors. Again, it is free at www.bladesinthedark.com, and you can see a bunch of playtest material that people are coming out with for different settings and things like that. If you are interested in playing and you're not interested in playing rogues, the game doesn't do that very well on its own. You will probably have to hack and create your own setting, but there's a ton of people that are already working on stuff like that. One of the settings I'm looking forward to the most is an official one that's going to come out. It came with a Kickstarter. It's called Sparrow's Folly, where it's a ghost story Wild West type setting, and that should be really interesting and fun to play. Thanks guys for tuning in, and I'll see you at the gaming.